Hi, everybody. This is Sanjay here, and we're welcome again to another episode of the Prime Podcast. I have two very special guests today, Naomi Bagdonas and Jennifer Aaker. They are both in the Bay Area, and I had the privilege of attending a workshop that they conducted recently entitled Humor in the Workspace and or in the workplace. And I felt, there were some really amazing lessons there and requested them to join us on the podcast. So Naomi and Jennifer, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Hello.
It's so nice to be here.
Great to have you as well. And I think it would be great for the listeners to know a little bit more about your backgrounds and why you created this space or this specialization around spreading the mantra of humor in the workplace.
Great. All right. So I'll start. Naomi here. I teach at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, along with Jennifer, courses about the power of humor in business, and also courses about this new type of leadership, anchored on purpose and fueled by humor. Jennifer and I are the authors of Humor Seriously. And I specialize in coaching and consulting organizations and high performing leaders on the intersection of humor and business, which is a relatively non-traditional intersection, but I work with CEOs and celebrity clients um, to have more humor and also authenticity in the way that they lead. And then a bit of background, I spent my career really focused in business and in particular on designing executive sessions for teams. So facilitating board retreats or corporate offsites and really focused on the strategy of organizations. Meanwhile, I was doing improv comedy nights and weekends and sort of living a double life where I was keeping those two worlds completely separate until about a decade ago when I started integrating those two and realizing that actually bringing more humor to work is not just helpful for us to be more happy and have more fun at work, but really to make us more effective, more bonded, more, gain status and influence, and ultimately be more effective at our jobs as well. So that is around the time I met Jennifer.
And I'm a behavioral scientist. Most of my work is really focused on how happiness and meaning in life differ, how to use time in meaningful and unconventional ways, and how to leverage technology to cultivate human well being. None of which is humorous in the least. But one thing that happened to me was when I first met Naomi, she was teaching a session for me. She was guesting in my Power of Story class. And actually, the topic had a lot to do with quantitative analytics. And so she was talking about neurochemistry and eigenvalue analysis to really understand how does data versus story move teams. Again, not humorous stuff. But what was really remarkable was watching the students react to this guest lecture. They were laughing as they were learning. And fast forward 8 weeks later, she scored extraordinarily high on ratings, not because she was entertaining and not because they laughed, but because they remembered it more, the content more,
Mm.
took away more from it, were more persuaded, and it was more, memorable. So that's one of the things that started me down this path of, what is the science of humor? When and why does it work and how? Because I've always thought of it as this improvisational tool that couldn't necessarily be studied or learned, frankly.
Right, right. So, that's always been my view as well, right? Humor is something that's more impromptu, and generally, whenever you attempt to be funny, you end up being not so funny. But when you don't, it ends up being kind of natural and authentic, as you said earlier, Naomi. Would be great, perhaps, if you could share a couple of examples, where which you have noticed that has really worked well for people, and sometimes in a repetitive way with a new audience. So and that might probably set the tone for some of the various types of humor, and when to do it and how to read the audience and all of that. But maybe we can start with a couple of examples from each of you.
Sure. So, gosh, we have so many favorite examples from the leaders and execs we've worked with. One more recent example during the pandemic is a CEO we actually teach with as well, named Connor Demon-Yeoman. And Connor is the CEO, the co-CEO of a large nonprofit here in the US. In early 2020, just weeks after the world or at least, the US had gone into quarantine, he's leading his first ever virtual all hands meeting with his entire organization. So people are exhausted, they're scared, and Connor wants to show care and reassurance, but isn't quite sure how. So during the session, he makes a few remarks, shares his screen, and then passes to another teammate to speak. But when he does, he intentionally leaves his screen share on. So the entire organization, thinking this is a horrible mistake, is watching as he closes his PowerPoint, opens up a Google search, and types in things inspirational CEOs say during hard times. Everyone laughs. Everyone totally loses it. And, it's sort of this beautiful moment of bonding. People are seeing each other smile, some of them for the first time on Zoom. But we also know from the research that moments like this have real upside for Connor and for his organization. So we know that leaders with a good sense of humor are seen as 27% more motivating and admired. And, their teams are more bonded and creative.
No, that's fascinating. I think the fact that there is actually, I guess humor seriously is in itself enough of an oxymoron. But, the fact that it has been studied scientifically, I never thought I would be having a serious conversation about humor. Naomi, any examples, or Jennifer, any examples that stand out for you?
Well, I love that one, but I also have, we had Dick Costolo, who is the CEO at Twitter. He's also been in venture, angel investing at Google, and a lot of the spaces that you play in. And one thing that was interesting that he shared with our students is, especially when you're playing at high status levels, the goal here is just to disarm, just to come across as human, so people actually are candid with you. And so he uses humor for lots of different reasons, but one of that is just just to basically disarm and have him show up in ways that are more human. So he shared a story with our students where one day he was in an elevator. This was at Twitter, in the Twitter building. And someone, entered the elevator with him and whispered to their colleague, shh, that's the CEO. And Dick, sort of loudly says, I'm here. My name is Dick. It's great to meet you. It's not like rocket science. But that small little story is, I think, so illuminating about how, the power of being, humorous and human, and how it can, disarm.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think a lot of it is really just getting people around you to be comfortable with you, right? And I think many a times these things don't pan out as one would have thought, and sometimes they can even backfire, especially when there are cultural differences, or speaking across Zoom and the other, where face to face is often quite different because you see the full body language and everything like that. But sometimes it's very hard to read eyes of people and so on. So, what are some perhaps even examples of things that may have backfired and sometimes famously, or and what are some tips to ensure that the audiences that people are not making like a huge blunder as they're trying to be funny?
It's a great question. Well, sticking with Dick Costolo for a moment, one thing that we know is, especially at high status levels, self-deprecation is so powerful. And now we have these 4 humor styles, which we will talk about in a minute. But we know that Dick is the sniper stand-up style of humor. And so he tends to build intimacy through teasing. Now, the problem for a high-profile CEO who wants to build intimacy through teasing is that it can come off as punching down. It can come off as sort of making fun of people of lower status. And so, especially with a global audience, he'd be leading these all hands with thousands of people around the world dialed in. He had to make sure that his humor wasn't coming across in an inappropriate way. And so what he did was he actually had some of his team members join him on stage, and he would encourage them to make fun of him. So, basically just however you would treat me normally behind the scenes, I want you to treat me that way. And so one of these people was April Underwood, who's a longtime colleague and senior product director at Twitter. So the two of them knew each other very well, and he would bring her up on stage and she would just rip into him. It was playful, it was funny, but it was also, self-deprecating. And so, and the fact that it was unplanned, that it was unfolding in the moment, made it even funnier. And of course, it was a really safe way to do this because Dick and April could play off of each other in a way that felt completely natural and fun without it feeling pre-planned or without feeling too sniper or stand-up-y. And this is something that Larry Page and Sergey Brin did too, along with Eric Schmidt at Google. So Eric told us about, not long after Google's founding, Larry and Sergey instituted these hour-long company-wide meetings at the end of each week called TGIF. Thank goodness it's Friday. Right. And for the first 30 minutes, the team just, reviewed news and product launches for the week, but it was really anchored on them also showcasing their personalities with each other. And, especially this sort of witty repartee between the two of them and later between Eric as well was often a real highlight, and it continued to reinforce the culture that they were building there as well.
Wonderful. So maybe we can dive into the different humor styles that you sort of alluded to. Maybe Jennifer, you want to give us some background on that, and how people can analyze themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So there's Naomi and okay, well, first, let me back up. The biggest thing for me, who's someone who never, viewed myself as humorous, didn't want to view myself as funny, the biggest unlock for me personally has just been this idea that being humorous is not the same thing as being funny. The humor and funny are not equated. And one of the ways that people can start to internalize that is through a finding that Naomi and I have shown over the last decade of a lot of research, which is there's 4 different humor types. So Sanjay, we will guess yours at the end of this. One of them is the stand-up, and they're boisterous and bold. They're unafraid to ruffle a few feathers to get a laugh. And so, they're probably really good at roasting others at big weddings. Opposite of that is the sweetheart, and their humor style flies under the radar. They're honest and earnest and understated. They would never do anything that would overstep or hurt someone's feelings. They're really outstanding at uplifting others. We have a common friend, Selena, who actually scores quite high on sweetheart. Then comes the sniper, and she also has a little bit of sniper in her too. And that's edgy and that's dry and nuanced, and they're the masters of the unexpected dig. It's sometimes hard to get snipers to laugh, but when you do, you feel great. And the last are the magnets, and they're expressive and charismatic. They might tilt a little bit toward the physical or the silly. They're generous with their laughter. They're often, kind of the life of the party. So, Naomi, do you want to guess what Sanjay is based on our brief interaction with him?
I was going to say more sniper, but on your bio, Sanjay, you say Sanjay loves his wacky sense of humor, which is such a magnet thing to say.
It was written by my partner. It wasn't written by me.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Sense. All right.
Your partner is magnet.
Your partner's a magnet and you're a sniper.
That's great.
Jennifer, what do you think?
What's interesting, Sanjay, is that each of these styles have downsides too. So for example, the stand-up and the sniper, because they often tease as a form of intimacy.
Just when I was starting to feel good about myself.
Yeah, we just gave you about 5 seconds of basking in your awesome style.
That's right. Now we want to get to know your partner. He sounds very fun and wacky. But anyway,
he's no longer my partner. He's fired.
Okay, he's out of there. That's sniper.
Yep.
But snipers, and stand-ups, because they use humor as a form of intimacy. So if I tease you, like firing my partner, for example, that often means, I trust you, I know you, I like you. But, there's also risk at offending or alienating audiences if they don't understand that about you. And in contrast, the magnets and the sweethearts, because they're so focused often on uplifting others, they're at risk of over-indexing on self-deprecation, which, as Naomi said, is a great asset when you're at high status levels, but at lower status levels, it can boomerang. So what's useful about this is that people often think humor has so many risks, especially right now during a time we all feel kind of humorless, and we've seen other people overstep or inadvertently, or advertently actually, offend or alienate. But the reality is that knowing our own humor styles, then knowing how to read the room, which means understanding other people's humor styles and being open to shift given the context, that is a tool set that is extraordinarily useful at mitigating risks.
Yeah. So I think, while it's true that one can certainly in a room, it's perhaps a lot easier, and perhaps you fixate on a few people and try to build your confidence when you're in the room. Nowadays we're having all these virtual meetings, just like this one over Zoom. One of you has the camera off because it's not working, but in general you're going to have.
I love the air quotes around not working. Just for everyone listening to the podcast, Sanjay gave the most passive aggressive, sniperish air quotes.
Well,
That was absolutely hilarious. I feel like we need to publish on YouTube just so that everyone can see those air quotes.
Done. Yeah, you've got. So I guess camera not working. It's and so it is just a lot harder, right? I mean, even half the time people are perhaps on the phone, and you have a small screen, and it's very hard to certainly even make eye contact, right? So what are some things people can do perhaps to gauge the audience, and just know the mood people are in, and sometimes humor might uplift, and sometimes it might just just culturally as well, right? As we're now doing a lot more global meetings, and certainly if you're talking to people in Japan, or I used to always struggle with when I went to Europe and I had meetings in Switzerland, right? I never knew. I studied in France, so I sort of was trained to understand the French sense of humor, which actually can be quite dry but very, very funny. But when you go to the German side of the world, it's not that obvious that they're appreciating what you're saying, certainly in a business meeting, right? So what are some tips? I think people who are inherently funny probably just curb themselves a lot in these business meetings because they just are scared to make a mistake, right? So it would be great if there are some tips you could share on things that as techniques people can do to do the right thing.
Yeah. The first tip is don't try to be funny, try to be more human. So it's so tempting to jump into the agenda of the meeting, to lean on efficiency, especially with Zoom fatigue, especially with, just how busy we all are. And there's a CEO I work with who has a Post-it right on her computer that says, "How was your weekend?" And it's her reminder to ask every person, it doesn't have to be that question, but some personal question at the beginning. And Sanjay, even in this podcast, right before we started, we were not recording. You told us a couple of stories, which made us laugh. We sort of we had some shared experiences, and we're able to warm up before we dove in. So that's one thing, is just try to be more human. If you want to be more structured around it, we work with many execs who have a sort of icebreaker or something that they start with before they dive into their meetings. What we find is, again, things that are just aimed at giving people a window into your life are the most powerful. And this is we have a real advantage over Zoom because we're all in our living rooms or converted closets or offices or whatever they are. And so one example is we work with a senior leader who runs a global team, hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and with her executive team, who's in 12 different geographies. She the other day started the meeting and said, "Okay, Before we dive in, I want everyone to go to your refrigerator and pick out one item that no one else on this call has. Bring it back, and we're going to present that item. Everyone presents in 30 seconds. And so, people are laughing about what's in the fridge. People are sharing different things that they cooked with their
Oops.
family members, whatever's moldy, whatever that is. But it was such a beautiful way of acknowledging cultural differences, because you're going to have different foods that are culturally relevant,
Right.
and
Right.
bringing in humanity rather than humor. And of course, there was a lot of laughter from that as well.
That's taking icebreaker a bit too literally, though. But
That was great, Sanjay. Look at you go with your dad humor. You are really shifting into different styles in real time.
anyway, so no, that's actually interesting. But I think generally the whole idea of icebreakers as well, and just getting the ball rolling, are things I think that people, even who are not naturally sort of inclined, can sort of start off well, right? But I find quite often people who, as you said, attempt to be deliberately sort of funny and structured about it end up becoming too sort of rigid when they're delivering it, right? So it doesn't happen naturally. And what are some pieces of advice? Some people may just never be able to pull it off, right? And is there a structured way in which people um, can build things into their repertoire, or is it just don't try to be who you want?
Yeah. So think about it from, sort of starting at kindergarten, then going to high school, then, college and grad school. So it's a level. The first step is just, understanding what you find to be humorous and, quote unquote, embracing that more authentic sense of humor. And most people can remember when they were younger, what did they laugh at and find to be humorous, as a way of kind of jumpstarting that if you have lost, your all sense of humor, which, by the way, in investment banking, certain worlds like the investment world, that has oftentimes very little humor and levity. And so you might have to kind of, again, go back to kindergarten. And then once you understand your own humor style, and then number two, starting to understand the styles of others. So again, you can start to read the room and understand that there's very different styles of humor. The next thing is really to start, adopting some secrets from comedians. And so the core of humor is really about truth and misdirection. So as you said, it's not about being funny. It's really just starting to notice the truth in certain environments, like the fact that for the last 2 years, I have not combed the back of my hair, just the front. That's not necessarily funny. It's just true.
It works
Um,
on Zoom. It
that's
certainly
right.
works on Zoom meetings.
That's right. And then you use rules that we know from comedians who, oftentimes seem naturally funny, but there's actually a real art and science to it. One of those little rules is, misdirection. And so it's like giving people, neurologically, two things that they expect are coming, like, 1, 2, and then ham sandwich. And that unexpected third thing, or that unexpected last thing, is what creates that misdirection and surprise.
Got it. So multiple choice, set of questions you ask, the last choice is so far off that
That's
people
right.
might find it funny or something.
And another simple tool, we could go deep on this, but chapter 3 of the book, Humor Seriously, has a host of examples that are actually quite funny. Another one is simple callbacks. So Sanjay, you're in a meeting with a portfolio company, and someone in that meeting makes other people laugh. And you just take note of it, you write down that phrase, and then at a later point in time, you make reference to that phrase, something that I'm sure you do naturally all the time. That's called a callback. And the reason that one's so powerful is A, there's no risk associated with it. And B, it makes the person who originally created that laugh line and made others laugh actually feel quite valued. And we're living in a time right now where when people feel seen and valued, that really matters.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. I think, yeah, go ahead, Naomi.
Oh, I was going to say, just to put this into practice, this idea of misdirection is often why we see people fail from a humor perspective. So they can have a great idea, but it just doesn't land. And so I'll give one example of a joke that you made earlier. So you said, I said, this bio is great. And you said, oh, my business partner wrote that. And I, see something like I'll fire him, or he's fired, but I'll go ahead and let him know, right? That's really funny, right? And so what I would do to that to make it even
It would have
more
been funny if he wasn't fired. He's actually been fired. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, like, oh, we've walked into a landmine here. Okay, so but to make that even funnier, you want to build misdirection so that it makes us think that you're going to say something nice about him. Right? So you could say, oh, thank you so much. My business partner actually wrote that. He's so creative like that. And I'll let him know right after I fire him.
Right after
right. And so
firing.
you want to build people, you want to lead people in one direction before revealing that unusual thing. And you will get it's amazing that you'll get more laughs, you'll get people actually getting the humor more if you're able to do that.
Yeah, I had one of these incidents that completely fell flat. So we had a founder talking, with all the partners in the meeting, and he said, "Look, I find these meetings really, really productive. I'd love to have more of these. When all of you are together, I learn so much." And I said, "I really apologize. That wasn't our intent." And he looked at me and said, "What are you talking about?" But,
I love it. Yeah, right. Just the unexpected, right? The misdirection is built in there, right? People expect you to say, oh, thank you so much, but instead by flipping it. And that is such an effective strategy. And Sanjay, what you're doing there is you're just being on the lookout for those moments to say the unexpected thing. And oftentimes we get on autopilot with each other where we just say the expected thing, and throwing in some of those unexpected lines gives people a dopamine hit in their brains. It makes them pay attention more. And so not only are you lightening the room and making people laugh, but you're also, by the way, perking people up who have maybe zoned out and getting them re-engaged in the conversation.
Yeah, no, and I think, and I'm really fortunate to have two, amazing partners actually who also are, a great sense of humor. And when you least expect it, they're going to say something that sort of, brings you back on track and also can humble you very fast as well. So,
right.
So it's great. So, a lot of this also, as you mentioned earlier, is about building trust, right, with people, and certainly over a period of time, especially across geographies, across cultural differences, or across hierarchy in the organization, or in the business relationship. The other day you mentioned an expression that I've written down. I tweeted it and I got a lot of retweets. I apologize, I didn't attribute it to you guys then, but I will now. But,
did you wait? I'm giving air quotes right now. Did you forget to attribute it to
I'm glad
Naomi, now I know why we were invited on this podcast. I just envision a series of tweets that will, again, the source will be forgotten.
Forgotten, yep. But so one quote you mentioned was, people want to feel like they want to be valued members on a winning team, on an inspired mission, right?
Right.
And I would really, love for you to elaborate on that. It's such a powerful statement. In fact, somebody retweeted it saying, here's $1 billion tweet. So,
oh my gosh, well, Sanjay, when you start
it.
getting more money and more respect and also greater trust, just want you to know, Naomi's last name is spelled Bagdonas, Bagdonas. Mine's Aaker.
Aaker, A-A-K-E-R, like Rob.
Yeah.
We're both on Twitter, so Sanjay.
I will tag you guys.
And so, so this is a lot of the behavioral science around what actually creates meaning and purpose in life are really reduced to like 3 or 4 different things. And the power of this single sentence is that 4 elements of what actually creates meaning in life and work are embedded in it, right? So people need to feel connected to something bigger than themselves. That's the higher purpose. The inspired mission. They need to have that feeling of connection. they're on a part of a team, and they need to feel valued. So they need to feel like there is a sense of autonomy and then positive connection. And then last but not least is they need to have a sense of sort of excellence. What is winning? What is high performing in this context? And you don't have to be winning, quote unquote, all of the time, but you need to know what the path is toward getting to that North Star, that form of excellence. So we call that PACE, purpose, autonomy, connection, and excellence, which is captured in that sentence. What's really interesting is that levity, having a sense of levity and humor, actually enables that sentence, that context, to be better operationalized. Because when you laugh with others, or you really do make them feel valued, when you do have a sense of humor, you actually are much more likely to feel like you're on a team. In fact, one study found that when you simply laugh, just briefly before a conversation, you're 30% more likely to divulge personal information. So you divulge personal information about yourself much more easily. And so that feeling of trust, and I'm on the same team with you, can happen. So in essence, humor can actually shrink the distance between two strangers. And then it also allows you to be able to achieve your goals and influence others, working toward that inspired mission, as well as be more effective in a path of what is winning or high performing. In fact, some of the people that we interviewed for this book, as well as good friends of ours, are really in really remarkable contexts. We'll pick a couple. One is Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who would use humor to disarm. One time, she was actually going into meeting with a Russian foreign minister and had heard that the room was bugged. So she put on this big bug pin that she had. She has this cadre pin. It's just a ginormous pin. And so as she walked into the room, the Russian foreign minister couldn't help but smile, right? And she didn't even have to say anything. It's just, and that disarmed the situation. And she relayed to our students in our class how, that shifted the nature of that conversation. But we talked to Stephen Curry, who's a prominent basketball player, or the CEO, Sarah Blakely. These people that really drive high performing teams use humor diffusively, incredibly adeptly. And one of the reasons is because it does help that sentence. That is a $1 billion idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, Naomi, anything to add on about this sort of bringing levity in and really helping people feel great about themselves and be more inspired, especially given my audience here is largely entrepreneurs. Startups have, I always say, 360 days of frustration and 5 days of glory in a year. And in the leap year, it's 361 days of frustration. You don't get a break even then. So during those
Absolutely.
360 days, right, you need a lot of this, because you're really living for those 5 days in the startup, unlike in a large company where every day is kind of a similar blood pressure. In a startup, it's sort of, a lot of hard work, and you really just have to believe, and then you have these moments that really are awesome.
Right.
So yeah, would love to hear your thoughts around, again, similar topic.
Yeah, I think, especially for many of the founders we work with who are growing fast, sprinting, there are too many things to juggle. And so they feel, and so two things happen. One, culture can sometimes be on the back burner because there are too many business imperatives that they're focused on. And then two, there can be this bias towards over programming, or doing indexing on really serious things. So I'll zoom out for a second and give an example of the founding of the Elders. So the Elders is a group of independent global leaders that was formed with the goal of furthering human rights and peace, world peace, founded by Nelson Mandela. Some of the founding members were Kofi Annan, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, President Jimmy Carter. And during the founding of this really important group, just a couple days before all of these folks were going to convene on Richard Branson's private island, they so again, world leaders from around the world flying in for this summit to found the elders. And so 3 days before the session, Jean Olwing, who runs Richard's foundation, arrived with Richard, and she put on the table a stack of PowerPoint documents about, a foot thick. And she said, okay, great. We have so much to cover. We've got data. We've got, global trends. We've got the entire agenda mapped out for the next 3 days. And Richard took one look at it. He flipped through. He said, this is fantastic. I'm going to need you to cut it in half. And, everyone sort of looked around at each other and said, well, what do you mean cut it in half? We have so much to do. And we have such important people. And we're at this important founding moment of this organization. But that's exactly what they did. So they made the agenda half work and half play, is what he said. It needs to be
Wonderful.
half playtime. And so they had these structured sessions, but in between those structured sessions, they had swimming lessons and activities on the sand and, hikes and things like that. And as Richard and Jean reflected on the experience, they shared with our students that it was during playtime when some of the real most important work happened. And in particular, they recalled this moment where Archbishop Desmond Tutu and President Jimmy Carter were sitting together during playtime, their toes dug into the sand, laughing, where they came up with the founding principles of the elders that Nelson Mandela would later report out to the world.
Wonderful.
And so I share this story because, especially when for founders who are racing and juggling and feel they have such a business imperative to tackle, build levity and humor into the agenda, allow for playtime, because it's often when some of the most creative ideas happen. It's often when some of the most important connections happen. So that would be,
Fabulous. So I think we're kind of coming up on the hour now. And I know we could go on and on. Maybe you can spend a little bit of time on the book itself, and how people can probably get it and get a copy, and maybe Jennifer, you can talk a little bit about that. And I also know that you guys are have a TED Talk that's coming out, and I think by the time this podcast is out, the TED Talk will also be live. Any secrets about the TED Talk that you'd like to share as well?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So the TED Talk is only 9 minutes, which is very exciting because we all have 9 minutes, and it comes out on November 18th. So that will be wildly exciting. And yeah, just come visit us at humorseriously.com. My dog's in the background, and he is very enthusiastic about all of you visiting at humorseriously.com. But yeah, you can take the quiz there, which helps, allow you to figure out your humor style. Mackie, my dog, who is Naomi's god dog, is definitely a magnet, a very fierce magnet. And your cat is probably a sniper. Anyway, come on to humorseriously.com and check out the book and the quiz. And we're so delighted to have spent this time with you, Sanjay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And great having you guys on the show as well. And really looking forward to the quiz, the book, the TED Talk, and of course, releasing this podcast, which we'll share with you. Thanks so much. Have a nice day.
It was a total delight. No air quotes needed.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sanjay.
Dear listener, listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners Podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.